June 22nd, 1940. Paris, France. The air is thick with tension as the city breathes under the heavy boots of the Wehrmacht. The Eiffel Tower stands tall against the overcast sky, an icon now overshadowed by the oppressive rule of Nazi Germany. A narrow, dimly lit apartment on Rue de Rivoli, a man named Jean Moreau adjusts his collar, glancing nervously at the door. He's only 29, but today, the weight of history presses on his shoulders. A muffled knock echoes. Moreau's heart skips a beat. He quickly opens the door, ushering in a woman in her 30s, her face marked by the wear of the past few years. This is Madeleine, a member of the French resistance, known for her ability to navigate the treacherous world of occupied Paris without drawing attention. She is here with news. They're rounding up the Jews in the Marais district, Madeleine says, her voice barely a whisper. I overheard them in a bar. The Gestapo is acting quickly. We have to move now. John nods, his face hardening. It's moments like these that turn a man from a citizen into a soldier. We'll organize a network to get them out, he replies, determination creeping into his voice. This is the moment that Jean Moreau, once an ordinary engineer, becomes part of the vast underground resistance. Like thousands of others across occupied Europe, he will risk everything to strike at the heart of Nazi power, knowing that each action may be his last. The resistance wasn't just about bombs and guns. It was about ordinary men and women forced, to make extraordinary choices. It was about a flicker of defiance in the face of an all-encompassing nightmare. Jean's first task is to help smuggle Jewish families out of Paris, using the back channels of the city's labyrinthine streets. In these moments, every step he takes echoes with the cries of the oppressed. But Jean's resistance wasn't without its costs. The German occupation forces were swift in their reprisals. By 1941, the Vichy government had cracked down on underground movements, tightening their grip on the French people. Arrests, tortures, and executions became a regular part of the Gestapo's daily business. In the shadows, a network of brave souls formed across the country. French, Belgian, Dutch, Polish, and many others, all risking their lives to fight an invisible enemy. And while their actions would remain largely unrecognized for decades, they were the unsung heroes whose contributions were invaluable to the war effort. October 5th, 1941. Amsterdam, Netherlands. The streets of Amsterdam are eerily quiet beneath a gray sky, but beneath the surface, the city simmers with resistance. The Germans occupy the city with ruthless efficiency, but hidden in the heart of this occupied territory, a small but determined resistance cell is at work. Among them is 24-year-old Hans de Vries, a printer by trade, who spends his days under the guise of a humble worker. By night, he becomes a vital cog in a network that defies the Nazi regime. Hans slides his hand over the freshly printed leaflets, urgent, fiery words calling for Dutch resistance against the German occupation. His fingers graze the paper, tactile reminder of the risk his small, underground press operation faces every time a new batch is produced. The leaflets contain crucial intelligence, critical calls to arms, and coded messages for Allied bombers, telling them where to strike. Hans knows this simple act of printing could cost him his life, but the risk feels smaller compared to the duty he feels to the millions under Nazi rule. Tomorrow night, the British will drop the bombs on Rotterdam. We need to get these to the right people, says his partner, Anna, a fellow resistance member, as she helps him stuff the leaflets into bags. Hans nods grimly, his thoughts briefly drifting to the memories of his own family, now scattered, some in hiding, some in concentration camps. The pain of losing so many close to him fuels his resolve, sharpening the edge of his commitment. The printing press is hidden beneath the floorboards of an old building, the walls lined with history as Hans's group works tirelessly under cover of darkness. The small cell is a beacon of hope for their fellow Dutch citizens, but the stakes are high. The Gestapo is everywhere, sniffing out resistance like a pack of hounds, waiting to sink their teeth into any hint of rebellion. In the streets, the city's atmosphere is thick with fear. The Allies' aerial campaigns are becoming more frequent, and every bombing run brings danger closer to Hans's doorstep. Yet he and his team persevere. The leaflets, each one like a pinprick into the heart of the Nazi machine, spread through. The Dutch underground, passed hand to hand, stashed in suitcases and hidden in cafes. The night passes slowly, filled with the relentless sound of the press machine at work. Each print is a small victory. Hans takes a brief moment to look out of the narrow window, his eyes scanning the streets below. The faint hum of a distant bomber echoes through the night sky, a reminder that this fight is bigger than any one person. It's a war fought not only with weapons, but with words and deeds, and every piece of paper, every act of defiance, is a step closer to victory. But the price of resistance is steep. Hans knows it won't be long before the Gestapo catches wind of his underground press. And when they do, the consequences will be swift. His group's very existence is an act of defiance that could lead to the end of their lives. But they have no choice but to continue. February 14th, 1943, Warsaw, Poland. The winter chill clings to the streets of Warsaw, the air sharp and biting as the city lies under a thick blanket of snow. The night is quiet, the silence broken only by the crunch of boots on snow. But no, the heart of the city. There is movement, clandestine, hidden, urgent. In the shadows, members of the Polish Home Army, Armia Krajowa, gather in a small, dimly lit apartment. The walls are thick with the smell of smoke, the flicker of candlelight casting long, wavering shadows on the floor. Janek Kowalski, a 29-year-old former schoolteacher turned resistance fighter, sits in the corner, his face drawn with the weight of the decisions he has made. The flicker of the candle illuminates the map of Warsaw spread out on the table before him, with key locations marked in chalk, warehouses, military barracks, and the railway stations used by the Nazi forces to transport goods and prisoners. "We move tomorrow night," Janek says in a low voice, his fingers tracing the lines on the map. "We hit the warehouse near the train yard. It's the supply line for the German forces in the city. If we take it down, we strike at their heart." His comrades nod in agreement, but there is a heavy sense of foreboding in the air. In Warsaw, the resistance has been growing bolder in its attacks, but so has the German response. The Gestapo is becoming more ruthless, hunting down partisans with increasing ferocity. The reprisals for each act of defiance are becoming more brutal. Janek's thoughts linger on the faces of his comrades, each one scarred by the terror of occupation. His mind flickers back to the early days of the war, when he had been a simple teacher, imparting knowledge to children. Now, he leads a group of men and women who risk their lives every day for freedom. "I've heard rumors." Anna, a fellow fighter, speaks up, breaking the silence. "Someone in our group is a traitor. They're feeding information to the Germans." Janek's heart sinks. The whisper of betrayal has been growing louder in recent weeks, but he had tried to ignore it. Now, faced with the reality, the weight of the threat is palpable. A spy in their midst could destroy everything they've worked for. He looks around at the faces of his comrades, some young, some older, all with the same fire in their eyes. The cost of their fight is becoming clearer by the day. The following night, as the team prepares to carry out the raid, Janek's heart races. The cold air cuts through his uniform as he leads his team through the narrow alleys, moving like shadows, making their way toward the warehouse. Every sound is amplified. The distant hum of German vehicles, the crack of ice underfoot. But as they approach the target, something feels wrong. The sense of danger is too acute. Janek signals for his team to halt. He pauses, listening to the night. A gust of wind whispers through the streets, but it's not the wind that sends a chill down his spine. It's the unmistakable sound of German boots. "They've set us up," Janek mutters, his voice thick with realization. "They've been betrayed." Suddenly gunshots ring out in the distance. The Germans have arrived just in time to catch them. In the act, Janek's heart races as he makes the split-second decision to pull his team back. The mission is a failure, but the stakes are higher now. They must escape or face capture, torture, and execution. As Janek and his comrades retreat into the shadows, the sound of German forces closing in fills the air. The winter wind howls around them, masking their movements as they sprint through the alleys of Warsaw. Behind them, the explosions from their failed mission rock the city, signaling the end of their brief victory. But in the days that follow, Janek is faced with the aftermath. The traitor in their ranks has been uncovered, an old comrade who had turned over their plans in exchange for survival. In the brutal world of resistance, betrayal is an ever-present danger. It's a reminder that while the resistance fights for freedom, the price of that freedom is always steep, and not everyone will make it out unscathed. July 20th, 1944. Berlin, Germany. The heat of the summer sun bakes the streets of Berlin, where the sounds of the war are felt in every corner of the city. For the German military elite, the war has become a long, drawn-out struggle. The days of rapid victories seem a distant memory, and now, with the Allies closing in from both the east and the west, the atmosphere is tense. But within the walls of the Reich, beneath the veneer of absolute control, cracks are beginning to form. In a quiet office deep in the heart of the German military complex, Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg sits, staring at the map of Europe laid out before him. His right hand trembles slightly as he adjusts his monocle, his eyes scanning the marked locations, the advancing Allied forces, the burning cities, and the stalled German defenses. This is a man who, for years, served under the Nazi regime but now stands at a crossroads. Von Stauffenberg's heart beats with a powerful resolve. He and a small group of conspirators have been planning this moment for months, meticulously coordinating every detail. The mission: to assassinate Adolf Hitler and cripple the Nazi regime from within. Their goal is not just to end the war, but to stop the brutal machine that has caused so much devastation across Europe. "Tomorrow we act," von Stauffenberg mutters to himself. He glances at the pistol in his lap, the cold metal reminding him of the enormity of what he is about to do. He has spent years within the system, climbing the ranks, learning the patterns of Nazi leadership, all for this moment. His co-conspirators, all men of various ranks within the Wehrmacht, the SS, and the civilian government, are equally determined. They understand that failure will bring death, not just to them, but to their families and their country. Yet, they are resolute. They will not stand idly by as the Nazi regime continues to drag Europe into destruction. On the night of July 19th, 1944, as von Stauffenberg prepares for the mission, he looks out over Berlin. The city seems to hum with the noise of the war, yet it is filled with a sense of foreboding, like the calm before the storm. He knows that if he succeeds, he will change the course of history. If he fails, the consequences will be disastrous for him and everyone who stands with him. The next morning, on July the 20th, von Stauffenberg arrives at Hitler's headquarters, the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia. Under the guise of a routine meeting, he carries a briefcase containing a bomb. It's hidden within the papers, just as the plot has been hidden from the world. As the meeting begins, von Stauffenberg finds himself standing close to Hitler. He feels the weight of the moment in his chest, the knowledge that this small device could bring an end to the Führer's reign. With one last glance at the room, he places the briefcase under the table near Hitler's chair. He sets the timer and steps out of the room as if nothing is out of the ordinary. The explosion, when it occurs, is deafening, but something goes terribly wrong. The bomb does go off, but the force of the blast is less than expected. Hitler survives, and within hours, the conspirators' plan unravels. The Gestapo moves swiftly, rounding up anyone suspected of involvement. Von Stauffenberg's group is exposed, and a brutal purge follows. The attempt on Hitler's life is a failure, but it is not the end of the resistance. The failed assassination attempt highlights the sacrifices made by those within the German military who sought to end the war. These men, like those in the resistance movements across occupied Europe, risked everything, including their lives, to oppose tyranny and oppression. As the story of the failed assassination attempt unfolds, one thing is clear: resistance is not defined by success or failure, but by the willingness to stand up against tyranny, regardless of the cost. August 15th, 1944, Normandy, France. The air is thick with the scent of salt and earth as waves crash against the Normandy coastline. The beaches, once peaceful and serene, are now the battlegrounds of history. The Allies have stormed the shores of France, marking the beginning of the end for Nazi occupation in Western Europe. Yet, even as the Allied forces advance, a different battle is being fought just beneath the surface, one that will shape the fate of the war. Among the chaos of D-Day, one man, Pierre Lefebvre, stands quietly behind the lines, watching as the massive invasion force moves toward their objectives. A former teacher and farmer, now a resistance leader with the French Maquis, Pierre is no stranger to hardship. For years, he and his comrades have waged a guerrilla war against the German occupiers, striking at supply lines, sabotaging infrastructure, and aiding the Allies in any way they can. Today, though, is different. Today, Pierre and his unit are tasked with aiding the D-Day landings, providing intelligence on German troop movements, and cutting off supply routes that lead inland. As the Allies push forward, Pierre and his men will carry out their final acts of sabotage behind enemy lines. Is everything ready? Pierre asks his second-in-command, Jean. Jean nods, tightening the straps on his rifle. The explosives are set. We'll hit the bridge just as the Germans start retreating. Pierre looks out across the rolling hills, the distant sounds of gunfire and explosions in the air. The invasion is proceeding as planned, but the true fight is still ahead. The Germans, though cornered, are not ready to surrender. As the Allies advance, the Maquis will have to continue their work, striking where the Germans least expect it, disrupting their plans at every turn. The next few days are a blur of covert operations, sabotage supply trains, and hit and run. Attacks on German patrols. Pierre and his men are shadows on the battlefield, moving with stealth and precision, knowing that each mission could be their last. By the time the Allies break through to Paris, Pierre and the Maquis are no longer just a nuisance to the German forces. They are a vital part of the Allied strategy. Their operations have crippled the Nazi war effort in France, and their contribution to the liberation of Paris is immeasurable, but the cost has been high. For every successful mission, there is a loss. Pierre's unit has suffered casualties, some killed in action, others captured and executed. The death toll among the French resistance is staggering, but their resilience is unwavering. They know they are fighting not just for victory, but for the future of their country. As Pierre stands in the streets of Paris, witnessing the liberation of his homeland, he feels a bittersweet sense of accomplishment. The war is far from over, but the tide is beginning to turn. The Allies have made a crucial breakthrough, and the resistance has played a pivotal role in that success. However, the battle is not over. As the Allies push forward, there are still numerous pockets of German resistance, still many sacrifices to be made The shadows of war are still long, and the legacy of those who fought in the shadows will continue to be written in the final chapters of the war. April 30th, 1945. Berlin, Germany. The city of Berlin stands on the edge of collapse. The once mighty capital of the Third Reich is a shell of its former self. Buildings lie in ruins, the streets are riddled with debris, and the air hums with the constant roar of artillery shells. The Allied forces are closing in from the west, while the Soviet Red Army has encircled the city from the east. The walls of Berlin are crumbling under the weight of defeat, but within the heart of the city, a small group of German soldiers and civilians are still fighting desperately to defend their homeland, amid the chaos within the Führer bunker beneath. The Reich Chancellery, Adolf Hitler, remains holed up, clinging to power even as the inevitable end approaches. Outside, the world is changing, but inside the bunker, Hitler's grip on reality continues to slip. The sounds of battle rage above, but Hitler, determined to avoid the shame of capture, has already made his decision. Meanwhile, in the streets of Berlin, the resistance, small yet resolute, continues its fight against the crumbling Nazi regime. The last acts of defiance come not from the occupying Allies, but from those who once fought for Hitler and are now determined to see his downfall. Among them is a man named Friedrich Müller, a former Wehrmacht officer who had once believed in the promises of the Führer, but now realizes the horror of the regime he had supported. Friedrich's involvement in the resistance was born of necessity. As the Soviet forces advanced, he saw firsthand the devastating toll of the war and the horrors that Nazi ideology had wrought on the people of Europe. He had been an officer, but now, with the war nearly over, he understood that survival meant rejecting everything he once stood for. Together with a handful of fellow soldiers, Müller begins a final campaign of sabotage against the retreating German forces. They know that the Allies are closing in, but they are determined to make one last contribution to the fight for freedom. The tasks are simple: cut the lines of communication, destroy vital supply depots, and prevent any remnants of the Nazi war machine from regrouping. But their efforts are futile. The war is over for Germany, and even the most dedicated resistance fighters cannot change the course of history. The city is collapsing from within, its defenders scattered and broken. As the Soviet forces breach the city's final defenses and push deeper into the heart of Berlin, Müller and his comrades realize the futility of their struggle. In the final days of April 1945, as the last remnants of Hitler's regime fade into the history books, the world watches as Berlin surrenders. The resistance, whether from within the German ranks or the occupied nations, has played its part in the Allied victory, but its ultimate impact lies not in the final battles, but in the small everyday acts of defiance that allowed the world to survive the darkness of war. May 8th, 1945. Europe, across the continent. The war in Europe has officially ended. The swastika, the symbol of the Nazi regime, is no longer seen flying over capitals or cities. It has been replaced with the flags of liberation. From Paris to Warsaw, from the streets of Amsterdam to the hills of Italy, Europe begins to take its first steps toward healing. The guns have fallen silent, but the wounds of war are deep, and the scars are not only on the land, but also on the hearts of those who fought. In the wake of victory, the true cost of resistance starts to come into focus. The Allies celebrate their triumph, but those who fought in the shadows are left to reckon with their own role in this victory. For the ordinary men and women who had taken up arms against the Nazi occupation, victory brings both relief and sorrow. Many will never see their sacrifices acknowledged by the world. They are the unsung heroes whose names will remain largely unknown to history, yet their actions shaped the very course of the war. Pierre Lefebvre, the leader of the Maquis, returns to his village in Normandy after the liberation. The war is over, but the trauma lingers. His body is weary, his spirit battered. The missions he led, the lives he saved, the men and women he lost, each of them is a part of the complex legacy of resistance. The people in his village no longer look at him with suspicion, but with reverence. They see him as a hero now, but Pierre knows that the true heroes are the ones who never made it back. Those who fought alongside him in the woods, the cells, the underground press operations, and the sabotage teams. In Warsaw, Janek Kowalski, the former teacher turned resistance fighter, is greeted by the jubilant cries of his people as the German occupiers retreat. The city is a ghost of its former self, destroyed, scarred, but free. He walks through the streets, a silent witness to the rebirth of his homeland. But the joy of victory feels hollow. His comrades, those who fought by his side in the darkest hours, are not there to celebrate with him. Many have been executed. Others remain buried under the rubble, their sacrifice buried in the annals of history. Across the border in the Netherlands, Hans de Vries, the printer who risked his life to spread resistance leaflets, is finally able to return home. He and his family gather around a small dinner table, the laughter of his children filling the room. Yet, the weight of the years of secrecy, fear, and loss hangs over them. He is grateful for the survival of his family, but the faces of those who perished in the underground struggle still haunt him. The final days of the war have brought freedom to Europe, but for those who fought in the resistance, the question remains, was it worth it? Was it worth the loss of friends, of family, of one's own sense of security? The world now looks to rebuild, but the resistance fighters are left to rebuild their lives in a world that no longer feels familiar. They are tasked with carrying forward a legacy, one that cannot be measured in medals or accolades, but in the quiet, enduring strength of their commitment. In the aftermath, the story of the resistance is often overshadowed by the grand narrative of the war, the battles, the generals, the victories. But the resistance movements across occupied Europe were integral to the Allies' success. Their intelligence, their sabotage, their constant defiance made it possible for the war to be won. Their courage, often unnoticed and uncelebrated, is what truly turned the tide of the war. As the years pass, the world moves on from the war. New generations are born, the scars of war begin to fade, and the world turns its attention to the rebuilding of nations. But the stories of the resistance fighters remain. They are whispered in quiet conversations, recounted in history books, and remembered by the families of those who fought. They are the shadows of war, the untold stories of those who rose to fight in the darkest hours and whose bravery and sacrifice shaped the future of Europe. And though the war may be over, the legacy of resistance lives on in the hearts of those who remember in the stories passed down through generations and in the simple enduring truth that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit will never be fully defeated.